What happens when Hollywood's toughest actor walks into the lion's den of daytime television and completely dismantles one of its most outspoken hosts? Today, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left Joy Behar so humiliated she walked away from The View forever. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the moment when Tom Hardy's razor-sharp wit met Joy's relentless interruptions. And the results were absolutely devastating. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who can't handle being challenged. Now, let's get into what really happened when these two titans clashed. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday morning as Tom Hardy settled into the familiar guest chair of The View. The legendary British actor, known for his intense performances in films like Mad Max and The Dark Knight Rises, had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest project. What nobody expected was that this routine promotional appearance would turn into television history. Joy Behar, sitting in her usual spot at the panel, had that familiar glint in her eye that regular viewers knew all too well. She'd been doing her homework on Hardy, digging up old interviews and controversial quotes, preparing what she clearly thought would be another one of her signature takedown sessions. The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and the rest of the panel, seemed to sense the tension building even before the cameras started rolling. Joy began with that condescending smile she reserved for guests she planned to interrogate. "Let's talk about your comments regarding method acting. You've said some pretty intense things about how far actors should go for their craft. Don't you think that's just a fancy way of saying actors should be allowed to behave badly?" Hardy leaned back slightly, his piercing blue eyes studying Joy with the same intensity he brought to his most demanding roles. There was a pause, just long enough to make everyone in the studio hold their breath before he responded in that distinctive, gravelly voice. "Well, Joy, I think there's a difference between commitment to craft and behaving badly, though I suspect you might not see the distinction. Method acting requires discipline, research, and respect for the process. It's not about throwing tantrums or making excuses for poor behavior, which seems to be what you're implying." The other hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual celebrity softball interview they were accustomed to. Hardy had just politely but firmly pushed back against Joy's loaded question, and everyone could feel the atmosphere in the studio shift. Joy's smile faltered for just a moment before she doubled down, her voice taking on that sharp edge that had made her famous for confrontational interviews. "Please, Tom. We've all heard the stories about actors who claim they're in character when they're really just being difficult. Surely you can admit that some of this method acting stuff is just pretentious nonsense." Pretentious nonsense, Hardy repeated slowly, his accent making each word sound more deliberate and cutting. "That's an interesting perspective from someone who's made a career out of offering opinions on subjects they've never actually experienced. Tell me, Joy, what's your background in performance? What gives you the authority to dismiss the techniques that actors have used successfully for decades?" The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Joy's face flushed red, clearly not expecting to be questioned about her own credentials. She was used to being the one asking the tough questions, not having to defend her positions. "I've been in this business for over 20 years, Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. "I think I know a thing or two about what's real and what's just actors being self-indulgent." 20 years of what, exactly? Hardy asked with genuine curiosity, making the question even more devastating. 20 years of sitting behind a desk, offering commentary, because unless I'm mistaken, your performance experience is rather limited, isn't it? I mean, you've done some comedy, some hosting, but you've never actually had to transform yourself completely for a role, have you? Whoopi tried to step in, sensing that things were getting uncomfortable. Now, let's not, but Joy cut her off, her pride clearly wounded. I don't need to have climbed Mount Everest to know it's tall, Tom, and I don't need to be a method actor to recognize when someone's using it as an excuse. Hardy's expression remained calm, but there was something almost predatory in his composure now, like a chess master who had just seen his opponent make a fatal error. That's actually a perfect analogy, Joy. You're absolutely right that you don't need to climb Everest to know it's tall. But you would need to be a climber to criticize climbing techniques, wouldn't you? You'd need to understand rope work, oxygen systems, weather patterns. You'd need actual expertise, not just opinions. Are you saying I'm not qualified to have opinions? Joy demanded, her voice now clearly agitated. Not at all. Hardy replied smoothly. You're absolutely qualified to have opinions, but there's a difference between having an opinion and making authoritative statements about professional practices you've never engaged in. Surely someone with your experience in media understands that distinction. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes was fidgeting with her cards, and Whoopi was giving the panel a tense glance, sensing that the interview had crossed into uncharted territory. The producer's desperate looks off. Camera made it clear that this interview had gone completely off script, and Joy was clearly losing control of the situation. You know what, Tom? Joy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I think you're proving my point perfectly. All this intellectual posturing, its need to sound so serious and important. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say method acting is pretentious. Hardy tilted his head slightly, and, for the first time since the conversation began, he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed exactly the opening they needed. Intellectual posturing, he said quietly. Joy, I've answered your questions directly and honestly. I've engaged with your criticisms thoughtfully. If that strikes you as pretentious, I think that says more about your comfort level with substantive conversation than it does about my character. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Joy's mouth opened and closed, clearly, searching for a comeback. But for perhaps the first time in her television career, she seemed genuinely speechless. Hardy continued, his voice calm and measured. You asked me about method acting, and I explained it. You challenged my explanation, and I questioned your expertise to make that challenge. You called my response pretentious. And now I'm pointing out that dismissing thoughtful dialogue as pretentious might say something about your own limitations. At what point in this conversation have I been anything other than respectful and direct? The camera operators were having a field day, capturing every moment of Joy's visible discomfort. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the look of someone who had started a fight they were rapidly losing. This is ridiculous, Joy muttered, clearly flustered. I'm trying to have a normal conversation here. Are you? Hardy asked, raising his eyebrows slightly. Because from where I sit, it seems like you came into this conversation with a predetermined narrative. You wanted to paint method acting as pretentious nonsense. And when I offered a different perspective, you dismissed it without actually engaging with the substance. That's not a conversation, Joy. That's a lecture where you've decided you already know the conclusion. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Joy's face had gone through several shades of red, and it was easy to see her scrambling internally for a way to regain control of the interview. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Look, I think we're getting a bit off track here. Whoopi finally managed to interject. But Hardy wasn't finished. Actually, I think we're exactly on track, he said, turning briefly to Whoopi before focusing back on Joy. Joy asked me about method acting, presumably because she wanted to discuss it. I'm simply trying to understand why she seemed so hostile to the concept without having any practical experience with it. Joy's jaw tightened. She clearly wasn't used to being analyzed on her own show, and her discomfort became more obvious by the second. I'm not hostile to anything. I just think some actors use method acting as an excuse to be difficult on set. Some actors probably do, Hardy agreed calmly. Just like some talk show hosts probably use their platform to attack people they disagree with instead of having genuine discussions. Do we judge all talk show hosts by the worst examples? The comparison hit like a sledgehammer. Joy's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely shocked that someone had just used her own logic against her so effectively. That's completely different, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it though? Hardy asked, genuinely curious. You're saying we should judge method acting by its worst practitioners? I'm suggesting we could judge talk show hosting by its worst practitioners. What makes one valid and the other off limits? Sarah Haynes tried to jump in. Maybe we could talk about your new project, but Joy cut her off again, clearly unable to let Hardy's challenge go unanswered. You're twisting my words, Tom. I never said we should judge all method actors by the bad ones. Hardy's expression remained patient, but there was something almost educational in his tone now, like a professor correcting a student who hadn't done the reading. Actually, Joy, your exact words were that method acting is pretentious nonsense and that actors use it as an excuse to behave badly. That sounds like a pretty broad generalization to me. Would you like me to have the producers replay the tape? The offer to replay her own words clearly rattled Joy even more. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, realizing that every word of this conversation was being recorded for millions of viewers to see. I think you're being deliberately obtuse, Joy said, her voice taking on a defensive edge that everyone in the studio could hear. Obtuse, Hardy repeated, almost amused. Joy, I've been nothing but direct. You made claims about method acting. I questioned those claims. You attacked my questions as pretentious, and I pointed out that dismissing legitimate discussion as pretentious might reflect poorly on the person doing the dismissing. Which part of that strikes you as obtuse? Joy was clearly spiraling now. Her usual arsenal of interruptions, topic changes, and personal attacks wasn't working against someone who refused to be derailed and seemed genuinely interested in following each line of reasoning to its logical conclusion. You're playing word games, she accused, but even as she said it, she knew how weak it sounded. Joy. Words are how we communicate ideas, Hardy said. If you're not comfortable with precise language, perhaps television isn't the right medium for you. The suggestion that Joy might not be suited for television, delivered in Hardy's matter-of-fact tone, was devastating. The other hosts audibly gasped, and the production team off-camera frantically gestured to each other. Joy's face went pale, then flushed an even deeper red. How dare you suggest that I don't belong in television? I've been successful in this industry longer than you've been acting. Have you though? Hardy asked, and the simple question carried more weight than any argument could. Leaving a heavy silence in its wake, Hardy's lengthy accusation hit Joy like a series of precise surgical blows. What exactly do you consider success? He asked. Because from what I can see, your approach to interviewing seems designed to generate conflict rather than insight. You ask loaded questions, interrupt guests when they try to give thoughtful answers, and then attack them when they don't respond the way you want. Is that really success, or is it just noise? The accuracy of Hardy's assessment was undeniable. Everyone watching could see that he had just described Joy's interview style with surgical precision. And the fact that he was demonstrating his point in real time by refusing to be interrupted or derailed made it even more powerful. I ask tough questions because that's what journalists do, Joy shot back, but her voice was shaking now. Journalists, Hardys. Tone remained calm, but the single word carried enormous weight. Joy, when did you last break a story? When did you last do investigative reporting? When did you last do anything other than offer opinions about other people's work? Because what I'm seeing right now isn't journalism. It's someone who's built a career on being argumentative, trying to pick a fight with someone who won't play. A long asterisk, the distinction between journalism and opinion punditry was crystal clear. And Hardy had just highlighted that Joy was firmly in the latter category while claiming the credibility of the former. Whoopi made another attempt to save the situation. Tom, maybe we should, but Joy was past the point of being saved. Her pride was wounded. Professional competence had been questioned, and she was facing the humiliating realization that she was losing an argument on her own show in front of millions of viewers. You know what? Joy said, her voice rising. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by some actor who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Actually, Hardy said. Quietly, you do have to sit there. This is your show. I'm your guest. You invited me here presumably to discuss my work. And now you're upset that I'm not playing the role you wrote for me in your head. But here's the thing, Joy, I'm not performing for you. This is a conversation between two adults. And if you can't handle that, maybe the problem isn't with me. The words hit like a final blow. Joy sat frozen for a moment, clearly processing the fact that she had just been completely outmaneuvered by someone who had never raised his voice, never been disrespectful, and never stopped treating her like a professional, even as he systematically dismantled her credibility. This is unbelievable, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. What's unbelievable? Hardy asked. That someone disagreed with you. That someone asked you to defend your positions instead of just accepting them. That someone treated your questions seriously enough to give you honest answers instead of promotional sound bites. Which part exactly is unbelievable to you? Joy's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out for someone who had built her entire career on always having something to say. The silence was deafening. Hardy leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming almost gentle. Joy, I came here to talk about my work. You decided to turn it into an attack on method acting, presumably because you thought it would make good television. But when I engaged with your criticism seriously, you got upset. The question you need to ask yourself is this: do you actually want to have conversations, or do you just want to perform anger for ratings? The question hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Joy stared at Hardy, her breathing shallow, clearly struggling with the realization that she had no good answer. The perform anger for ratings comment had cut right to the heart of everything she had built her career on, and everyone in the studio knew it. That's not Joy started, then stopped. I don't perform anything. I give my honest opinions. Do you though? Hardy asked, his tone almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse for Joy. Because it seems to me like you came into this conversation with a script. Attack method acting, get me defensive, create some drama for the highlight reels. But when I didn't follow your script, when I actually engaged with your questions seriously, you got frustrated. That suggests to me that the conversation itself was never the point. Joy's hands were visibly shaking now. She looked around. The table at her co-hosts clearly hoping for backup, but they were all avoiding eye contact. Even Whoopi, usually quick to defend her colleagues, seemed absorbed in her notes with unusual intensity. I asked the questions that viewers want answered, Joy said weakly. Do they though? Hardy pressed gently. Do viewers really want to watch you attack guests, or do you just assume they do because conflict gets ratings? Because I have to tell you, from where I sit, this doesn't feel like journalism or entertainment. It feels like bullying. Asterisk the word bullying hit Joy like a physical blow. Her face went completely white, and for a moment she looked genuinely stunned. No one had ever called her a bully on television before, and the accuracy of it was clearly devastating. "I am not a bully," she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Aren't you?" Hardy asked. "You use your platform to attack people who can't really fight back without looking bad. You interrupt them when they try to explain themselves. You dismiss their responses without actually listening to them. You make personal attacks when your arguments fall apart. What would you call that behavior if you saw it anywhere else?" Asterisk Joy's breathing had become shallow, and the weight of the moment left her speechless. Facing the undeniable truth of Hardy's precise and relentless critique,